Good evening and welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm going to be your host tonight as Josh has decided to leave the cold weather for a few days. Tonight I have with me a person I know fairly well, and I'm really happy that she came along. And I'd like to introduce Representative Cushman. How are you, Lisa?
I'm good.
You're good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for being on. We are sponsored by Wilson Hill Pistol Club. I always forget to say that. So I appreciate their efforts to keep us on the air. So why don't you tell our viewers what committees you're on, what are the things that we could help you out with, or maybe some of the other people out with certain bills that are coming up.
Okay.
So I'll let you start there.
Sure. So I serve on the Health and Human Services Committee, and I have for the entire almost 4 years now that I've been in the House. We're just now getting Senate bills over. I didn't get to make it in today for the committee hearing because I had to bring my son to a field trip.
There you go.
But we didn't vote on anything. I was just listening, so I can listen later. But so we're kind of in a transition period right now with the bills.
Yeah.
So most of the House bills have gone over.
So it's crossover time.
Yeah,
Yep.
it almost. Tomorrow's the last day.
Okay. And you can explain to the viewers what that means.
Yeah, so crossover, essentially it's like the point where all of the remaining bills that are in each body where they originated switch and go to the other body for a vote, if they made it through.
If they make it through. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of the key thing. How many bills did you look at this year, do you think?
Goodness. It must have been in the 50s or 60s
For
for
your
House
commi-
bills so far.
For your committee?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a pretty busy committee.
Yeah, it is.
There's a lot of people that have backgrounds in healthcare but don't want to be part of that.
Sure.
So it takes a lot of your time, I know it does.
Sure.
So what bills do you think people should be aware of? They can't come in and testify now because that's already testified. That's already
Sure.
done.
Well, they can on the Senate bills that are coming over.
Okay.
But I would say in our committee, we sent over some. I sponsored a informed consent bill. It's HB 1863. Sorry, I can't remember.
Well,
the
you
number.
know what? People
But-
don't even know the numbers. They want to know
Yeah.
what the bill is. Yeah.
So it's essentially just a very simple bill that takes what's already in administrative rules that requires informed consent that doctors provide it to patients, and basically, that they have to document that they had a conversation with the patient and explain the benefits, risks, alternatives, and prognosis without treatment, essentially, because you'll hear a lot from patients that they find out they have this severe side effect from a medication. They never were informed
Wow.
that it can happen.
Yeah.
So all of these doctors contract with the state to be licensed with them. So in my view, they agree to be kind of led by the legislature and play within those rules. And I think it's just like basic human rights that if you're going to use your professional expertise to recommend and then prescribe something, or even a procedure, it doesn't have to be medication, it might be a procedure, that you give them full disclosure on, what they might expect.
Has that been an issue, do you think? Are there cases where they didn't get that?
I think there's many. I mean, I think during the pandemic, a lot of medications were given, a lot of protocols were followed that maybe weren't, didn't have a lot of research behind it.
Sure.
To know the long-term effects, and it kind of was, for a lot of people, it was obvious, but I feel like a lot of doctors kind of presented it as, it's definitely safe and effective, and later kind of found out.
Wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's one bill. What other bills that maybe are not in your committee? I have one that concerns me, and that's assisted suicide bill.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, where it sits in the process right now.
Sure.
And what, maybe what people were talking about.
I don't know exactly where it is in the process. I haven't been following it that closely, but it went through the House. It passed by a small margin. And we did try to bring it up for reconsideration. And I'm a little confused of why it wasn't brought up earlier in the day when we had the numbers in the room. And I know a lot of people are upset about that because we were asking leadership to bring it up so that we could reconsider it when we had numbers there. Some people were there just for that vote. I know that Representative Joe Petrie, who sits a couple of seats over from me, he was not feeling well because he's been having, well, I won't get into, he had some issues.
Right.
And he's like, I'm not really feeling well. I'm just going to, stay for this vote. And then he ended up having to leave before we could vote on that. So
Yeah.
that was pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I think people need to be aware of that, that does happen, that the speaker didn't reconsider it, wasn't able to bring it up or didn't want to bring it up, and that leaves you kind of in a really tough spot.
Yeah.
And especially if you're voting on something that you really believe in and you have to wait and wait and wait. So
Right.
that's...
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So it's now over to the Senate. I don't know. I really don't have my finger on the pulse of that,
Yeah.
how that's going to go over there. I've been really busy with home stuff and with the special committee on DCYF that I was leading and was subsequently removed from. But I've still behind the scenes been trying to help those families who brought those issues forward, and the people who asked for their redress of grievance for that.
So what would you be willing to talk about that DCYF bill? And you were the chair at the time, I believe, right, when it was introduced.
Right. So I could give you the whole story from the beginning, because it's kind of
I think it's
a complex
something people should
situation. I think they should.
Yeah.
So back in October, I received about 150 notices from people all over New Hampshire, basically pointing to provisions in the Constitution that say, here it says that we can instruct you and petition you to redress our grievance. Here's where it says in the Constitution that before any liberties are taken, that you have to have a trial by jury, and this isn't happening in abuse and neglect cases. And because of the arbitrary way that they're processing cases, custody cases relative to abuse and neglect charges, which aren't even really charges, they do it through civil process, right? Basically, they are saying the way this is being done is wrong, and it's arbitrary, and it's leaving kids in situations where they can continue to be harmed, and it's also on the other side, it's resulting in families losing custody of their children, and it wasn't following constitutional due process.
So are we talking about both New Hampshire Constitution?
Yep.
Okay.
State constitution.
Right, state constitution.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's what started it. They said, can you please form a committee and help
So why
us?"
did they come to you? What's your background that?
I didn't have any background with that. Somebody heard, I got a complaint from a constituent, from where, that he was his ex-wife maliciously filed a case on him because filed a complaint with DCYF on him because he had allowed his daughter, who had been proficient in using firearms since the age of 3, and she was now a teen, 13 or 14. He allowed her to take a walk in the morning, a hike. We live in rural New Hampshire.
Sure.
With a firearm in a zipped pocket, a handgun, and she walked. She went home. There was no issue. But later she told the mom, or someone told the mom,
Yeah.
and mom took, umbrage with it, and instead of dealing with it, it's a private family matter. They have a prickly relationship, and she filed a report with DCYF, which immediately resulted in her basically not following their parenting order that they had through the courts, and he couldn't see his child. And so DCYF was saying, no, you're not allowed to see her. They were very aggressive with him, saying, if you were in Manchester, we arrest people for, people get arrested for that. And
for what? For having to walk through the woods with a firearm on their head?
right. So then there were criminal charges actually filed. Well, before the criminal charges, he received a what happens with DCYF when you file a complaint, they'll come out and do their investigation, and then they will have a hearing, which you're not invited to.
It's not a public hearing.
It is not, and you don't even get notice that it's happening until after they make their finding, and they say, here's the finding, your name, are responsible for this, and you neglected or abused your child.
Wow.
Now, if you want to come in and if you want to appeal, you can come in for an appeal hearing. So that's the inverse of justice, right?
Right.
Under the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, under Part 1, Article 15 of the New Hampshire State Constitution, you can't have your liberties taken without your due process.
Right. Right.
And that includes notice. That includes a right to face your accuser, to have all of the evidence that's going to be furnished against you. And so it's kind of backwards the way that they do it. And so someone must have heard that I was trying to help this guy. They ended up dropping all of the charges against him because there wasn't evidence for criminal prosecution. So that tells you right there. But he still has this permanent nationwide abuse and neglect registry finding against him. So that can preclude him from employment, volunteer work. If he has custody issues later in court, it can be used against him. But
yet, DCYF has been in the news a lot lately with the Montgomery case, and so it seems to me that somebody there is dropping the ball. This isn't the first time this has happened, and based on what you said, it doesn't seem like they're willing to do the right thing or to follow the law the way it's written.
Yeah. Neither substantive nor procedural due process is being given to people who are involved there.
Is the head of that appointed?
It is, but he is by the governor.
Yeah. So here's another thing: we're having non-elected people, administrators, running an organization, DCYF, that's extremely important, and not doing the right work. Apparently, it doesn't appear that they have.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the Montgomery case, there's a problem with the DCYF in Massachusetts as well.
In New Hampshire too.
That's what I'm saying as well.
Everywhere.
New Hampshire is.
There was just a grand jury that did a investigation into a case in New York that was very similar. The mother had sent evidence that this child was being abused. The father ended up hosing him down and leaving him in the garage, and he died of hypothermia.
Oh my God.
And the mother had been saying, this is happening, but because DCYF are not investigators, they're not police, and actually they can if they go in and interview a child, it can mess up a police investigation later if they want to bring charges. So on the one hand, you're being kind of soft on crime. You're not criminally charging people with abuse.
Right.
So then it's not going through the due process that it's needed, and everything is in the hands of DCYF. Before it ever goes to a criminal trial. It's just, they do the investigation, and a lot of it just allows a lot of room for things to be arbitrary and capricious.
Right.
So your kids are slipping through the cracks because they're not getting, evidence isn't being brought to a jury of peers and the facts found by a jury, in a real trial. It's not normal criminal procedure. It's quasi-criminal, quasi-civil, the way that they handle it. So, and then it goes through the family court, which also is civil. Right. It's not criminal. There are not the rules of evidence there. Actually, the judge can choose to totally ignore one party's evidence if he wants to, and they do it quite frequently. So again, it's not real due process. It's not a court of record, which is where those are the higher courts that really process those things. They're open. You have the exculpatory evidence. The juries find the facts, and the judge just kind of helps them understand the law. So it's just totally the inverse of the way the justice system is to work. And it was an experiment that was begun in the 70s. The family court kind of started, I think, in the 70s in most states. And then through the 80s and 90s, the DCYF kind of or Child Protective Services in other states kind of became involved in the process. But it's really a mess, and I think like the simple way to fix it, and the constitutional way, is to process abuse and neglect in criminal court. These are crimes. Don't be soft on crime on the one hand and then wonder why children are dying or families are being ripped apart when they shouldn't be on the other hand.
Right.
You know, it's pretty simple, and we keep going back, and they rewrite the statute to change the way that things are. But if you look in those statutes too, they're totally antithetical to the way that rights are to be protected and assured by the Constitution. You know, you go in, there's a presumption already. There's actually a couple of bills that make it so that there's a presumption that a parent is unfit, and the parent has to prove
that they're fit,
that they are fit
instead of the other way around.
Right. So SB 417 and SB 459. I mean, it adds a lot of very vague criteria
And those
to
are
determine
both Senate
that.
bills.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and actually, they are. I think they were in Senate Finance today or tomorrow, and they're like the last bills that are going to come over, if they come over. They might have come over already. I haven't looked in a couple days, but they were pitched to be, hit out into the House at this point. But there's like a lot of there's room for a lot of arbitrary decision making, and these are really, really important decisions, that have to do with the family.
Right. That's kind of annoying to me that they really don't try to protect the family, and I'm sure there's abuse that occurs, and I'm sure they're needed. But to your point, they're not investigators.
Right.
So what do they? I mean, what do they do next? Okay, so now the person's charged. This gentleman is charged. Can that be taken off his record somehow, or does it have to come through DCYF, or how would that work? I mean,
so there's an appeal process. You could go to an appeal hearing, but everything there is led by statute, not by constitutional due process. It actually sidesteps constitutional due process. And there's a Supreme Court case. It's SEC versus Jarchese, and it's looking at this very issue of administrative agencies taking issues that under the Constitution would require like an Article 3 trial by jury,
right.
And they're changing the location and the name of what's happening, and then having it in these statutorily dictated, as opposed to common law and constitutional law dictated processes. And it's not a real court, it's an administrative tribunal. There are no judges, there are no oaths, there's no perjury. The family court is actually set up as an administrative court in New Hampshire. It is not.
I didn't know that.
It is not a court of record. So we have a lot of constitutional issues.
So you'd have to change the RSAs then, or at least add one.
Sure, we'd have to. So it's very convoluted. There's the Child Protection Act. There's there's 490D. Like the statutes are weaved in, I want to say like 10, maybe 12 different chapters and and sections of law. So it's convoluted. It's hard to get a real grasp on it. I think I do understand it now, and I have been working on some legislation to fix it.
Right.
But that's what the committee was for.
Right.
So I went to the speaker and I asked him, hey, I've got these petitions for to help, and they're not doing things in a constitutional way, and he was like, yeah, all right, let's get that going. And then kind of dragged his feet for months and months. And at first, he asked me what, who I wanted on the committee, and I gave him the list, and then kind of really narrowed down who I could pick from. Now it had to be members of this committee and that committee. What was happening is there were negotiations going on with the minority leader, and I think
bill.
It's not a bill. It was just a request to form a committee, a special committee.
Right.
So there were some hang-ups, and I was just rolling with it. I'm like, all right, I don't care. Let's just get there.
Right.
Whatever. I'll give these little things as long as we get the committee going and we can bring the issues out in the open, hear from the people, let these people air their grievance, let them testify, then we can get DCYF and the family court in to look at this and say, what's going on here? Because
So did the family court, or well, DCYF even make an attempt to work with you on this, or?
no, I had reached out to them one time before the committee had formed, and never got a response. And basically saying, hey, I got these notices. From what I can see, things are not being done right. Can we work together to get things going the right way? And then on that Monday, which was the second committee meeting, so finally the committee got off the ground. It was formed. We had a first meeting where we did organization. The next meeting, we were going to have a work session to kind of establish for the members of the committee, what is due process? What's constitutional due process? What are the essential elements of that? And Justice Lynn had given a nice speech a couple weeks before that on HB 1288, where he kind of laid out for UNH tribunals, and what that bill does is basically give some essential elements of due process. Face your accuser, have exculpatory evidence, have notice.
Right.
So he laid those out for us, which was helpful.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah. But it's kind of ironic because parents in family court have less, if that bill passes, parents in family court will have less of those essential elements of due process in their cases than UNH students and staff in UNH tribunals.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's obviously been the way they've done business for a long time.
For a while. It's an experiment. I mean, for the first, 170 years of this country, it was not done that way. Everything was through criminal court when it came to things like that, and you had all of the
Was it ever?
safeguards.
Did it ever go through criminal court here in New Hampshire?
It did. Yep.
Yeah.
Up until the 70s.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So we got it rolling. The second committee meeting was supposed to be about establishing what due process is.
Right.
I'm sorry. The third one was.
So you were organizing, kind of.
Yes. So
telling the people what it was about.
Right. And just to figure out, so what my plan was to establish what are the essential elements of due process. What does the Constitution require?
Right.
And then compare what is in the law now and how it's being done now, and hold it up to the scratch test. Does it pass?
Right.
And if it doesn't, let's bring it into line. And so we, that second meeting, I was just hearing testimony, I believe, at the beginning. And so people were coming in, and I had, the thought the whole time, like, oh, we can, RSA 1414 says any member of the general court may administer an oath to any witness before a legislative committee. And so I was like, this is a tool that we should be using in this committee. It's investigative in nature. It just makes sense. And so my clerk made a point of order, and we're going along with what Masons requires for that.
Right.
So my clerk made a point of order. It comes through the chair. I ruled on the point of order and said, yes, we can have them do oaths. The clerk confirmed that we can. It's just voluntary. We can't require it. That's not what the statute says. You can't require it. You can administer, so we could request. So I said, I'm going to request it of everyone testifying.
Right.
And
and it probably wouldn't look good if you requested and they said they wouldn't take the oath.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
That would tell you something right there, I would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I started asking, and it was mostly members of the public that day who were coming to air their grievance. Many of them thanked me and said they appreciated the
Your
opportunity
efforts,
to add weight to their words too.
Sure. Sure.
And nobody declined. And some people, like, as soon as they stepped up there, raised their hand and were like, yes. We got great testimony, really disturbing and sad testimony. It always is. And honestly, I really think that everyone in New Hampshire should watch the testimony that the public has given, because it just really paints how, like, one guy came up and he was like, I was accused of, hurting my son, but it was in a public pool, and there were criminal charges as well, and they were dropped because there were 4 adults in the pool that day who all spoke to the police and said, no, that didn't happen, and that it was a malicious complaint. by an ex in this situation. Another, again, it's a pretty common theme. So you have these malicious reports, and they can be anonymous. So that violates due process in itself.
Sure.
Usually you have to have equity. Someone has to have a stake in the complaint they're making.
Right.
And as well as the other person, because it can result in them going to jail or losing their children, which is akin to a life sentence in jail. On the other side, and there is a bill on that, HB 1111, and that did pass the House to make it so that they're confidential and that something can be done if a malicious report is filed to DCYF. But I think taking DCYF out of the investigative business would solve that problem anyway, because it's illegal to give a false report to the police.
Sure.
And if this goes through police, then you have all of that real investigatory power. But going back to, so he had that complaint made against him. The charges were dropped, but DCYF made a finding that he was guilty of abuse, and then made put protective orders for all of his children except the one that was living with him. So there's if they really believe this person is abusing children,
They would have taken that child too.
Right.
Right.
Or at least have some kind of protective order, follow-up, monitoring.
So
something.
what happens to those kids then? Like, do they go with family members, or what happens?
It depends. Sometimes it depends what the court. If there are family members available,
And
they
if
will.
not,
But they have
then
to
what?
pass a litmus test too, where they're basically deemed unfit, presumed to be unfit, and they have to meet all these certain benchmarks. When really your next of kin is your blood, and
Right.
unless there's evidence that they're
There was
a
abuse
danger
there,
to the
right.
child, they should just go with next of kin. And sometimes that's a hard hurdle to get over, and they'll end up going to foster care instead. So it's tricky.
Well, that's really sad that that continues to happen to these kids.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to understand that. It really is, that anybody would. Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking when you were saying that, I would think if you worked for DCYF, you wouldn't want to be an investigator. You'd want to do what you were trained to do, right? But apparently that's not true. That's part of their job.
Yep, it is. And sometimes when they interview a child, they kind of spoil the ability for the actual criminal investigation to interview a child, and do a forensic interview, because it's not witness tampering, but you've already kind of planted some ideas by the questions that they've asked. So that can actually make it harder to charge someone criminally with abuse. But so that second meeting, we had all those the testimony, and we were getting great testimony. All of a sudden, I got a little note on my laptop that said the speaker would like Representative Weber, who was the vice chair.
I know who she is. Yeah.
Who was the one person I asked to not be on the committee, and the speaker made her vice chair. Who it said to check their email for guidance, and so I checked my email, and it was an email from Aaron Goulet, who's in the speaker's office.
Yeah.
And he said the speaker asks that you do not continue with the oaths, and I'm like, well, we can't just stop now. We've got half of these people
Have taken an oath,
right?
right.
And so I called the caucus of Republicans, and I asked my fellow Republicans for their advisement, and I got some mixed answers. And my my friend Erica Leon volunteered to go up to the speaker and say, hey, can we just finish this meeting, and then we'll
Sure.
have a discussion about it. And she came back down, and I went into the other room with her, and she said, if you continue the oaths, the speaker says he's going to dissolve the committee.
That was Weber that?
No, that was Erica Leon.
that
That's
was
what she
Eric.
said, because she went up and talked
Oh,
to
I
him.
got you. Okay.
And so obviously I was like, what? Totally blown away. What do you mean? You're going to take away the People's Committee because what? And so I was like, I'm sorry. That's unacceptable and totally wrong. So I continued with the oaths and the testimony and the hearing.
But you said it before, and no one complained about it.
Right.
They came in and did the oath. So why was that such a big deal?
So who complained too? And
Right.
yeah, why is it a big deal? Why is it an issue? That's $1 million question.
Okay. Yeah. So was the committee dissolved then?
Not then. So myself and J.D. Bernardi went up and talked with the speaker after.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit of a heated discussion, but the first thing that he said when I walked in was, "You need to stop with the oaths." And I said, "I'm not going to do that. Why?" And he said, "If you don't, I could dissolve the committee." So that's the second time that I heard that ultimatum from the speaker. And he totally denies that now, that he ever said that. And I'll get to that issue. But so we had a discussion. I asked him why. He said, if you do oaths, DCYF's not going to come in. And I said, well, we're the House. First of all, they don't want to even play with having to be subpoenaed. They already look terrible in the public eye because of how many times they've dropped the ball with children and left them in harmful situations.
Yep.
It's like pretty much the general opinion of the public that there's problems with this agency and government should be doing something about it. And so I that didn't hold water to me. So we had more discussions, and I was like, well, we have subpoena power. In New Hampshire, our House rules limit subpoena power, whereas in Mason's, it's a chair. Any chair of any committee can issue a subpoena, but House rules limits it to it needs to be a whole vote of the House. So, and leading up, in the meetings leading up to the formation of the committee, I had met with the speaker and the deputy speaker several times, and when they were always like, oh, you won't get them to come in, you need to play nice, and I'm like, well, we have subpoena power. And Steve Smith actually laughed at me, and preposterous we would ever exercise that. And so these are the things that frustrate me, is we have these granted authorities that the people gave us to do their business and do it effectively to the best of our abilities, and they're being thwarted because you don't want to rock the boat. That's my conjecture, but it just didn't make sense to me. So anyway, then the conversation with the speaker continued, and JD talked about how he hears from constituents all the time when he's knocking doors. They say this agency is problem. We need to work on it. So we were having logistical conversations about it. He's like, you'll never get the Dems to vote to subpoena DCYF. And I said, well, won't that be a great day for Republicans?
Yeah, exactly.
When the Democrats all vote against subpoenaing this
child
agency.
Abuse and
Right. I mean, and it's like every other state seems to be looking at their child protective agencies because have been so many problems. And like Massachusetts did a deep investigation and kind of came out and apologized for how they handled things with the Harmony Montgomery case. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's...
I don't think we ever did that.
No, we didn't. We're like the only state who hasn't really made any changes or really dug in. Or there's been several attempts. There were 3 or 4 committees, but this is what I didn't want to happen with this committee, was have it be kind of, here's what we find, here's a little report, and we did our work, let's go home. I mean, I wanted to actually really get to the root of the issues. And now that we can see the root, which is that we're not following the Constitution, we're not providing due process the way we're supposed to. And that's why kids are being left in these harmful situations. And, now that we see the root, let's fix it. Let's stop hacking at the branches and setting up more statutes that we think are going to clean this up, and just get back to the basics of who's responsible for investigations. Law enforcement. And DCYF definitely has a role, I think. They can provide court-ordered, oversight after someone's been found guilty of this. If the state wants to have them provide parenting classes, support groups, therapy, those are really appropriate things for DCYF to provide. But having them be, investigator, prosecutor, and judge all at once is a huge conflict, and it's totally unconstitutional. So,
well, it's not even common sense.
No.
I mean, I think that I've heard a lot about DCYF and the complaints. People are not happy with them at all. I think Kim Rice was involved with some of that group at one time too, and she did a good job with with what you had to work with, right?
Sure.
So the fact that the committee was formed said there was a problem. And
Right.
then it appears to me that once you've given them sort of a head start on what's going on and how we might be able to correct it. Did you ever get to that point?
No. So after that, we had the conversation in the speaker's office, and we're kind of fleshing out. And he was just like, "No, we don't do it here." That was another thing he said. "We don't do it here." I'm like, "They do it in other states. Some states they do it. Every person who testifies in every committee
has to take an oath."
Right. In Congress, they do it that way. So I had researched, all of this beforehand. I'm like,
Sure.
How do they do? What are the logistics of this? How do they do it in other states? I looked into it all. I go into things. I try to be prepared. So at the end of it, he wouldn't budge on it. I didn't understand why it was still an issue, and I just said, "Well, the ball's in your court, Mr. Speaker. I intend to continue to use the tools that are in my toolbox."
Right.
And that was a Monday. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my friend Jim Kofalt, who said, "I'm relaying a message from the Speaker. Now the options are 3. You stop the oaths, he dissolves the committee, or we remove you as chair." And I'm like, well, that's not really any better offer. And I was like, I'll just make it very clear that they're voluntary.
Sure.
That was my counter
Right.
offer. And
So what's Jim's, I've had Jim on the show before, what is his position that the Speaker had to went through him to tell you?
he is in leadership. He's, I think, a deputy or assistant majority leader.
Okay.
But he was
Assistant-
also on my committee. Erica and Jim, they're like my dream team from Health and Human Services, right?
Right.
So, I trust them for advisement and for, working through things together. And so he gave me the message as, a friend and, messenger for the Speaker, and I gave the counter. And then the days that followed, I was texting Jason Osborne, and I was like, why is this an issue?
Yeah.
It'll be a great day for us if, we go to subpoena. And I was just getting the same arguments that just didn't hold water for me. And it just didn't make sense. I was really confused.
Yeah.
I was really confused. Excuse me. So Friday comes. I've been hearing that I'm going to be made an example of. And I got an email.
Made an example of?
Yeah, by the Speaker.
Okay.
So I got an email, and it said, your suggestion to dissolve the committee if you can't administer oaths, we've thought about it, and we are not going to stop the people's work just because of the behavior of one member.
But you never said that.
I did not. That was his ultimatum to me, and I basically called his bluff. That was my position, is really,
Right.
You're going to do that? That's super wrong. Like, I really hope you don't.
Right.
Please reconsider.
Right.
And then talked to the majority leader in the days following to, try to smooth it over and be like, can we
Sure.
come to reason here?
Right.
So, I was like, well, now this is not just a, behind closed doors where we're talking, amongst friends. Like, now you're suggesting that now you're saying that I said that, and that's an outright lie. And so I sent that email that he sent me and rebutted it with my account of what happened to the Republican members of the House and said, I ask for your support.
Right.
And I also posted it publicly on my Facebook and Twitter. I think there are some things that go way beyond party politics and are there's right and wrong, and that was I drew my line in the sand
you stuck
there.
with your core values and what you believed.
Right.
And we need more representatives like that because, unfortunately, I can relate something. When I went into the House, I respected a lot of people that were there. And I will say this publicly, and then realized that they were hypocrites. They were worried about their next step, whether they were going to be a senator or whether they wanted to be a chair of a committee or maybe even the Speaker. And so I think that's that's horrible that happens, and it continues to happen. And I don't know whether we have enough people in the party who are willing to stand up for the people's work, because you're representing everybody, and that's really what your job is supposed to be. I voted, I'm sure, a few times against what the Republican majority wanted to do because it didn't fit my belief. And so I think that people have to understand that you were there fighting for them, not necessarily for you, except you had done all this work. You were doing what you needed to do, and I respect you for that. That's awesome that you did that.
Thanks. So after that, there was some fallout.
I'm sure.
And I got a lot of support from members of the House. And
let me ask you this. Let me stop you there. From both sides, or just, I mean, you didn't.
I did actually, not from Democrat members of the House, but I did get emails from members of the public who were like, I don't agree with you on 99% of things.
But this one is a good one.
Yes.
Right.
And they were like, what is going on? Why is this an issue?
Yeah.
And that's what I just keep saying. Why are you dying on this hill? Why? And it just doesn't make sense. So, and I could speculate, but I won't. So following that, I think the speaker was feeling some heat and was trying to save face, so he called a caucus, and we went and met, and I explained to them exactly what I'm explaining to you. Right. And I put myself under oath. I took my Geneva Bible and I put it right up on the podium in Reps Hall, and I swore. And the speaker said that he would swear, but he didn't. And I started to tell, and as soon as I started talking about what was said in the office, he came up and started screaming at me. Screaming like, that's an outright lie. And then wow. I had my two friends, Erica and Jim, kind of then changed. Sorry, it's like hard. This is the hardest thing that I've dealt with. It's that I was betrayed by them, and they lied for the speaker and said that he never made that ultimatum.
Oh my
And
God.
Erica was the first person who told me, and then she was like, her dog had died the day before. Granted, she was in a difficult place, but I don't understand how she could all of a sudden say, she told me that it was her conjecture. And that's not how she presented it to me at all. She came down and said, if you continue, he's going to dissolve the committee. And then Jim had given me those
those options
later. And so later in text, Jim's like, if it sounded that I was saying that was really an option on the table, the speaker really knew that it wasn't, and I'll take blame for that. And Erica's saying, I'll take blame for what I said. It was just my supposition. It was just my understanding of what could happen. And so that's hard. The speaker appointed her vice chair. And so I was like, all right, well, at least I can work with her and she'll help, really make this something. So that we'll see how that goes. I just don't want it to be a dog and pony show where nothing's
done.
I don't understand why the New Hampshire legislature has all these tools, but we don't use them. If we brought in these departments and not just this agency, but I mean, there's problems in a lot of government departments and agencies. If we brought them in and made it, our common practice to, really dig into things and get serious about it instead of just focusing on bills, but also redressing grievance. Because actually the Constitution says that that's our first job. And in Part 2, it says that we do bills from time to time.
Wasn't there didn't they have a committee for redress of grievances before? I think Bill O'Brien, Al Baldessaro, I think it was when Bill O'Brien was speaker.
Yep.
That went away.
It did. Yeah, and that's like a big fear in the majority offices. We don't want to bring back those kinds of committees. And I don't understand that. I could...
I mean, you certainly want to listen to that. I mean, and a person has to feel that they can address some group to feel like they've been lied to or cheated, whatever.
Well, you learn. Legislators learn when people come in and say, this happened to me with this, government branch or agency. It's not right. Here's how it's not right in the law or in the Constitution. Can you fix this? Can we work, and like we can either work directly with the department and say, hey, like you need to, come back into correction here. And then if they're not willing to, like, just work with the legislatures, because we're the people's agents, we're there to protect their rights primarily.
Yep.
And if they're not willing, then we have other tools that we can use. We can subpoena them to come testify. We can ask them to give testimony under oath. We can subpoena any documents that we want to.
Sure.
So there's a lot of tools that we can use, and if we use them, I think that we could clean up government a lot quicker than doing all of these bills. 1,000 bills every
Yeah, I mean, I think
year.
we had 1,200. I mean, I can remember we had that all-nighter. Some people remember that they locked the doors and wouldn't let us out.
Right.
I mean, that was
that
was a little crazy.
Hey, God bless you guys for
But-
staying there, because people don't want to stay there even till 5 o'clock.
No. But it seems to me that that should be an easy fix. Just to fix it, it would seem to me that the committee's done its work, and the next step is to start taking some action on it.
Right. Yep. So that's all I wanted. If we bring them in, find out that there's some issues. There's probably personnel issues. Like there were patterns where we could see there's definitely personnel issues, but also a lot of process issues. So, and the legislature can work on both of those.
Sure. I mean, what I kept hearing was we don't have enough people, we're overworked, we need more money.
Right.
That
That's
seems-
always the answer.
Yeah. Like the more money we throw at it, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, and it never
it's-
pans out that way.
No, it doesn't. Never. We see that in schools.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other issue
Right.
for another night, probably.
Yeah.
but-
I do want to, just before I know we're getting to the
We're
end.
getting close, but we've got time.
Okay. I want to bring us to where we are now.
Yeah, that's
So the speaker had sent out, so we had the meeting, and it was obvious that the Republican caucus wanted oaths to be able to be administered in certain situations. Maybe it's not appropriate for a regular bill hearing where
Sure.
you're not getting expert testimony or you're not getting real witness testimony. You're not redressing grievance.
right.
You're not investigating. It might not be necessary.
Sure.
And that it should be, as it is now, to the discretion of the chair. The chair has, and then subject to overrule by the committee, members of the committee.
So the committee was in favor of that.
We didn't vote on it. Lucy Weber said she objected to it. The Democrats objected to it, but she said, "But I can count votes." so we didn't have to vote on it. I mean, we just
Yeah, you just agreed.
right. The chair ruled,
Right.
and that was my discretion, and I used it as we're supposed to. But yeah, and that's the problem. Anyway.
So where are you at? That's
Yeah,
what we're going for.
so he basically said, yeah, all right, we'll work on it. We're going to work on implementing these after that caucus. But I have not heard any real movement on it. So I sent out a letter basically saying, we, the undersigned, support chair's use of discretion in these matters and no arbitrary interference with our legitimately granted authorities for individual legislators or chairs. It shouldn't be that just because, for some arbitrary reason that a member who has the power over appointing chairs and vice chairs and committees can remove you as punishment for using your legitimate authority. That seems wrong. So I sent, and I got about 28 signatures on that, and I sent that yesterday morning this morning. And, just saying, hey, like, what's next? Because you said you were doing something about this. The caucus is waiting. What's going to change? Are we going to get a rule that says how we handle this? Are we going to, because like other states will say it's required in all committees except with subject to a waiver by the chair, but also subject to overrule. So there's different ways to go about it. And I sent out an email saying, this is how they do it in this state, this is how they do it in this state, and like, I sent it to the whole caucus so they could see.
Right.
And also the speaker had sent out guidance to the House, and he pointed to something in Mason's, it's section 800, I think it's 3 or 4, and he quoted it, and he ended it with a period, but he omitted the last part of it. And it basically said, it said that committee witnesses before the legislature need not be sworn unless there is a statute requiring it. And then there's a comma, and it said they're presumed to be required to be truthful, subject to contempt and penalty by the House. So he admitted the last part, that, we have the ability to hold them in contempt. But I think that the law, RSA 1414, was implemented early on in the early years of New Hampshire, and they used criminal process rather than House contempt process to deal with perjury before the House. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, it sounds like
we don't have a contempt process in the House.
Right.
So I mean, we could institute rules and we could hold people in contempt and stuff. But I think that the early legislature kind of went a different route by having that RSA and then the perjury charge too that can go with it. But giving a charge is not the main goal of having people swear under oath. It's also to just foster a, I'm not trying to like just go and like punish everybody for coming in line. You just want people to understand that this is a serious situation and they need to be honest, and there's an expectation they'll be honest, and that they can be held accountable, and maybe they want to add weight to their words by being sworn. So there's multiple reasons for that.
But again, you had no one say they wouldn't take it.
Right.
So
and those were members of the public.
Yeah, I was just thinking that the members of the public would just look at that and say, okay, that makes sense. I'm okay with that.
Right.
I'm going to tell you the truth anyway.
Right.
I think the testimonies are the best part of the job, really.
We need to know that our testimony is accurate. Because we're making very serious decisions based on that.
Yeah.
If we're not getting truthful testimony, we're going to make decisions in error.
Yeah. So. Which happens occasionally. Right?
Sure.
So how can people reach you? What's the best way for them to contact you? And
sure. Leah4nh@gmail.com. Just my email.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm sure you get back to people.
Yeah.
When you can.
I try.
Yeah.
Yeah. My legislative email is not the best place to reach me, I don't think.
Right.
Because it's just so
yeah.
overwhelmed with
and there's so much that comes through there. So
Yeah.
what do you see happening at the, let's talk a little bit into the future. We have a few more minutes left, but right now the House is pretty equal, right? I think Republicans have 3 more votes or 2 more maybe. I'm not
It depends on who's in the room.
Right, it depends on who shows up that day, right. And the whip usually takes care of that.
Yep.
You want to count who's coming in and what
Yep.
days. But we've talked about this quite a bit on the show with other people, that what do Republicans have to do to get an advantage this time around? And what are the key issues that you are hearing that maybe you didn't hear when you were running last time?
Key issues I'm hearing now. I feel like I just hear about the parental rights issues a lot with what's going on with the schools and the gender issues. The family court issues have been kind of on everybody's mind. There was a special committee on that too, which kind of, I don't think it did justice to what a committee should do. I think it kind of ended up being like all these other committees where they issue a report and kind of give a little Band-Aid and move on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those issues. I think that we need to start doing real work for the people. I think we need to invigorate our base. I think people are really, what's the word? I always forget this word. Disheartened or...
they're apathetic about it. They
Yeah.
don't care. Yeah.
Because I think they see government
Not working.
not doing what it's supposed to. We're not actually making effective change. I mean, maybe we'll lower a tax 0.5%, every budget cycle, or make minor fixes. But I think if we start really being champions for the Constitution and the people, that would invigorate the base. That would get Republicans out to vote. That would inspire people to, actually support Republicans.
Yeah, in a presidential vote or in presidential race, it changes dynamics a little, because people will lock into the president and try to vote right down the line like that. So they may not be switching, or they might switch.
Right.
If you look at some of the votes.
Yeah,
I
in our
also
state.
think that we need to build a bench, for people like in local politics.
Yeah.
The Democrats do a really good job of that. They win a lot of local positions in the town. They learn more. Their names out there more. They may not be doing what everybody wants, but that seems to be the way to do it. Where we have a tendency, not all of us, but we have a tendency to say, I'm not going to mess with that. It's what it is. It's never going to change. I live in a town. There's more Democrats than Republicans, so I don't stand a chance. And that's not true,
Right.
actually.
Right.
So I would hope that that message could be brought out.
Yeah.
And because you're right, we have to activate more people. And how do we get younger people? Because you're fairly young. How do we get younger people to get involved? Is it because we only pay them $100, and because most people will say, well, it's an old legislative body, and only the rich and the elderly who've retired who can be on that.
No, it's only the people who are willing to sacrifice who are doing it, or have the ability to sacrifice. I mean, I haven't been working.
Right.
Really, in the last 2 years, and before that, my husband was staying home with the kids and homeschooling
Sure.
them while I was working full time.
And now
so
you're
we
homeschooling,
sacrificed one income basically.
Sure.
To do this. So yeah, but young people are a really, really good option to run for the state house because they don't have children, they don't have the other responsibilities. You can do this job while you're working full time if
Sure.
that's your only main thing going on. But I think the left is really good. They're like breeding activists in the public schools and the universities. So
Sure.
they've like kind of knocked out the ability to manufacture leftist activists. And I think that the right really needs to start teaching the fundamentals so people can get invigorated with how great our Republican form of government is.
Sure.
And want to keep it.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time. We have some other things to talk about next week. The new people that are going into CD1, going to run there, and CD2 as well. We only had one candidate. We now have more than one. And we have a tendency to make mistakes like beat up each other in the primary, and then the opposition uses those words and those things against us when the general comes along. So I hope we get better at that. So I want to thank you again for coming. I enjoyed it, and I hope you had fun. It's good to get the truth out to people and let them understand what's really going on at the State House. So thanks
for the
again.
opportunity.
Absolutely. And we'll see you next week, and the real host will be here. Thank you.